So good morning, and I am Stevie Lawrence. I serve as Vice President for Post-Secondary Education at the Southern Regional Education Board here in Atlanta, Georgia. I would like to welcome you to this morning's webinar on supporting college students during COVID-19. We all know that this pandemic has impacted our lives from a number of perspectives, but for those of us who work in higher education, the very way in which we work and serve students has been tremendously impacted. Today's webinar is designed to shed light on exactly how student affairs professionals have been able to continue providing support for students in these challenging times. Today's discussion will be moderated by yours truly, along with two very well accomplished higher education practitioners, Dr. Toya Corbett and Dr. Marcus Chanay. And I just would like to introduce them both to you and give you some background. Marcus A. Chanay is a native of Pine Bluff, Arkansas. He's a higher education administrator, professor, researcher, trainer, and fundraiser. Dr. Chanay is currently the Vice President for Student Affairs, Enrollment Management, and Executive Assistant to the President for Campus Operations at Lincoln University of Missouri. He holds a PhD in Urban Higher Education from Jackson State University and an MS in Educational Administration and Supervision, also from Jackson State. He also holds a BS in Mass Communications from the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. Dr. Chanay has done further study at Indiana University, Purdue, Indianapolis, in the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, where he holds a certificate as a certified fundraising manager. And he also has attended Harvard University's Graduate School of Education, where he received a certificate from the Institute for Educational Management. Dr. Chanay is an accomplished author, where he has published a number of articles and manuscripts. His research concentration has been in the areas of recruiting, retention, and the involvement of African American males in post-secondary institutions, enhancing academics and serving through student attrition, and the relevance of historically Black colleges and universities. He is a member of several local and international professional and social organizations, where he is a board member and past president of the National Association of Student Affairs Professionals, and is a current board member for Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, where he serves as the International Director of Education. He stands on his personal philosophy of tomorrow's success is founded on today's preparation. Please welcome Dr. Chanay. Also joining us is Dr. Toya Corbett, and I'm going to pull up her bio here. All right. Dr. Corbett, an advocate for equity, diversity, and access in higher education, is the Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs for the University of North Carolina System Office. Prior to this opportunity, she served in several key administrative roles at North Carolina Central, impacting campus life as the Assistant Vice Chancellor and Dean of Students, and as the Executive Director of Student Engagement and Leadership. Earlier in Dr. Corbett's career, she was the coordinator for the Office of Student Activities at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. Before diving into student affairs, Toya spent 5 years in the corporate office of Wachovia, now Wells Fargo in Charlotte, North Carolina. While at Morgan State, she was named one of the top 50 women under 40 in Maryland. As a trained historian, scholar, and student affairs professional, Dr. Corbett has spoken at numerous conferences, workshops, and seminars. Additionally, she has curated historical exhibits and published a book titled The Morgan State University Women, The First 60 Years, 1934 through 1994. Toya is also an entrepreneur who conducts dining etiquette training and career coaching as the Etiquette Doctor. And she owns a t-shirt company called Black Genius Apparel, LLC. Black Genius Apparel's mission is to eradicate discriminatory and mythical philosophies concerning African Americans' mental aptitude while empowering, inspiring, and affirming Blackness, Black thought, Black pride, and the fortitude of a Black genius. Dr. Corbett is a life member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated and active in the Sigma Tau Omega chapter. She has served on the International Board of Directors for the sorority and several national committees. Dr. Corbett sits on the Board of Directors for the African American History and Cultural Center of Alamance County, North Carolina. After completing a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, Corbett earned a Master's of Art in American Studies, African American Studies, and a doctorate in history, both from Morgan State University. Please welcome our panelists for this morning's webinar. So we'll jump right in. Understanding the impact of COVID-19 globally, we understand that there has been tremendous impact in higher education, as already stated this morning. So with that, understanding the effects of COVID-19 as it relates, as it is today, explain what were your initial thoughts when the pandemic first occurred in March, and how did you initially think that it would impact college students? That's a good one, right?
It is. I'll start because when that second week of March came around, I was actually away from the office at an AKA conference, at our regional conference in Richmond, Virginia, with 4,000 women when it was announced that COVID-19 was now a pandemic. And so, and I remember getting a text from my managers, saying, how's the conference going? Have to shut you all down. And, just the fact that we were at the conference, that they're going to shut us down. Now let's watch the domino effect with everything else. And we were there a day, and then I never went back to the office.
Yeah.
I think I haven't been to my office since March 9th. And it just to see the domino effect. And I'm trying to remember, I think it was like Harvard or someone else who decided to close first. Mm-hmm. And, once that first university closed, we knew that others would, eventually close. And my thought was, how are all these students how are you just going to vacate campuses, and how are the students going to be able to navigate their way home? And if you're out of state student, if you're international student, if you don't have any money, if you have nowhere to go, if your parents don't really want you to come home, what are you going to do? And so your first thought was, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to all these, hundreds of thousands of students? And I would just say in the UNC system, we have about 250,000. That's a lot of students moving. That's a lot of moving parts, and also the staff, faculty. I think everyone for probably the first week or 2 weeks, we're just in a daze about what to do. And then we eventually, got it together. And I will say the UNC system actually started planning in January, when COVID-19 looked like it was going to impact the United States. And so we had started planning in January. It wasn't that we just kind of started thinking it in March. So we were pretty well prepared, having our former system office president be former head of the CDC. And so that was extremely helpful. And he kept us pretty calm, because he was very calm. But again, for that second week in March, it was chaos, even for your own home. Right. And so I just was just like, what are we going to do? How is this going to impact higher education? How is this going to impact my own house? So that was my thoughts.
It was funny what Toya just said. So I actually was at the Southwestern Regional Conference in St. Louis.
Okay.
And the hotel had to make accommodations, but also I had 30 students in Dominican Republic at the same time. This was spring break for the university, and they were there doing service, and And so, of course, it was trying to figure out how to get them back to the States safely, making sure they could get to the States safely. But for us, and like a number of other institutions across the country, it was spring break. Of course, we extended spring break, and we immediately put together a task force that has been meeting weekly since that point in time. And the task force consisted of not only the cabinet, but all the academic deans, a number of chairs, a number of key staff personnel. And the part here that was the most difficult part was trying to work with faculty and transitioning their classes from being face-to-face to going online. And I think that was the most difficult part, especially faculty here at Lincoln. A lot of them were not as techie savvy. And so they really had about a week to try to really work with them, work through our IT, and trying to get the platforms together for them. What platforms were easier for some people. Some people it was easy for them. Others, they were difficult because especially our older faculty. And then we went totally online for the remainder of the semester. And then we had to work with students and from a housing standpoint, in allowing students to be able to come not at that point in time, but during the month of April and be able to move out. The interesting part about this, Toya talks about being at the house. We were only not on campus probably for about 3.5, almost 4 weeks. Our governor basically opened back the state government, being here in Lincoln, we're the state capital. He opened the state back up. We were back in boots in April. And so what we did, we limited the number of persons on campus. And so that was a little bit difficult. And then he basically opened the whole state back up May 4th. And so, it just a little bit different. And at that point in time, Missouri really, other than St. Louis, Springfield, Kansas City, those were the 3 hot areas in Missouri at that particular time. I have to say that. The others were not hot. And so the governor felt that opening the state back up. And so really for the state of Missouri, it was not the same as I was observing across the entire country. But what really affected us was from a standpoint of income. All of a sudden, the governor announced as a state institution, I'm going to cut, I'm going to take money away from you now. And then as we get prepared for fiscal 21, I'm going to cut the budget 25% of state appropriations. And so then there was a panic really with us and trying to figure out this whole deal. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to take money at the end of the year that we were expecting. And then you're going to cut us 25% for fiscal year 21. And so that's where the whole difficulty in dealing with faculty, dealing with staff. I learned a lot through that process. Our faculty here are unionized, and you cannot go with the union faculty. You cannot cut faculty without going before the union. And so my experiences were not only dealing with the student apathy, but really dealing with everything that was going on campus with faculty and staff. But that was that transition. Again, sitting in St. Louis, and then all of a sudden the mayor of St. Louis says we're shutting down the city, or you're limited. They didn't shut it down at that point in time. They said you're having to limit, and the hotel just worked with us to get us through that last day for our conference. And I just knew at that point in time that this thing was definitely different. Mm-hmm. Trying to get our students back from DR was really, really something that we were nervous about. We were trying to make arrangements. We didn't want them to come on campus. And then we had international students sitting on campus. They couldn't get home. And so we were trying to make preparation for those students. So it really, from that standpoint, it was a lot. But I will say that as a university, putting together the task force, which was, pretty much led by our president, that was really very helpful. And then getting the buy-in from everybody, from the administrators, faculty, and staff, really helped us cope as we moved through that process. Students had a really hard time adjusting. I will say that much. Students had an extremely hard time adjusting.
You're going into my second question now.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I apologize.
So my second question is, what has been the biggest challenge when supporting students during this period?
Man,
because I'm not on the campus anymore, so I've got to kind of relax.
And just to give you the dynamics of a Lincoln University student, Lincoln University, Missouri is an open enrollment campus. Average GPA coming to campus is probably about a 2.5, 2.6. Average ACT is about a 17. So you have this diverse student enrollment here. And I tell people that all the time. Yes, we are historically Black college or university, but 44% of our student enrollment are non-African American. And so, but making that adjustment, especially for our students that lived in the inner cities, we have a huge student enrollment from St. Louis, Chicago, East St. Louis area. We have a huge, African American student enrollment from there. So it was a difficulty, and a lot of them didn't have the hot spots. A lot of them didn't have the technology, and so trying to make that adjustment was tremendous. And I had to commend our faculty. Our faculty really tried to assist students as much as possible through that process. And then on the other hand, I talk about that 44%. Well, where we're located within a 60-mile radius, there's a lot of rural communities. And so the same situation that was going on with the inner city students was the same situation that was going on with our rural student population. And so they didn't have the internet, they didn't have those capabilities. But we end up, really trying to work through the process. They end up doing, we had a policy already in place for satisfactory and unsatisfactory. So we ended up trying to assist students with that. Students took advantage of it. Now, again, when you look at the financial aid issue, that's a whole nother issue involving when you give students satisfactory and unsatisfactory on their transcript. But that a lot of students enjoyed that. Of course, we ended up giving back about 44% of housing, room and board back to the students. We ended up, we did not have a face-to-face commencement, which, upset some students. That was virtual, which did not really occur until August. We were trying to really hold up and thought we would be able to do a face-to-face, but we ended up doing a virtual in August. We ended up having to really, with the help of our alums, we had to keep about 40 students on campus. They were all international students. A number of the students could not get home. We have students from Jamaica, Bahamas. They could not travel. And a lot of those students have been here and have not gone home since March, to be quite honest with you. So with our alums, we were able to enroll those students. They took a summer class and really, going through all of that. Had to renegotiate contract with Sodexo, but Sodexo was having to renegotiate contracts throughout the entire country, most institutions that they were contracted with. It was just, from a student standpoint, we were really trying to ensure that our students would come back in the fall. And with all of this transitioning, we are face to face. So it's a little bit different from a lot of the institutions across the country.
Yeah.
The state of Missouri, all the state institutions made a decision that they were going to go face to face. And so that has been a very trying time for us this semester, to say the least. Today, thank the Lord, they are traveling home this weekend. We stopped at Thanksgiving, and then we're going online. Really, they had the break of Thanksgiving, then we're going online for 2 weeks, which includes final week. And then they're done for the semester. But really trying to transition students was difficult because of the type of students that we had. And then looking at the areas in which they lived in was a tremendous challenge for us. We tried to work with a number of companies as we try to get students hotspots. Some of the private institutions were able to send students laptops. We were not able to do that with our CARES Act monies. But again, we really had to work with our student enrollment. And like I said, when you look at what Lincoln is and who Lincoln is, that was difficult for the students to make that adjustment. But I would say that a number of students, because of the work that faculty did and the lenience that probably faculty gave to students this past spring semester, really assisted students and helped students through the process.
Thank you. So Dr. Corbett, taking in consideration Dr. Chaney's comments, what has been your perspective from the system office related to the challenges with serving students across the UNC system, which we know is it the largest system in the country, or one of the, largest?
One of the, it's not the largest, but not yet. One of several things, and I could talk about one of the programs that I assisted with, was the challenge that students were used to having certain services, meaning healthcare, psychological care, access to dining hall, and just, residential hall. And so mental health, is a big issue right now. And so we were able to provide a student health emergency grant to our institutions for them to have funding to quickly pivot to telebehavior health therapy, so be able to provide, one-on-one sessions via the internet, whether it be a laptop, computer, or telephone. And so students would still have access to that mental health or counseling services now through Zoom for Healthcare or WebEx, HIPAA compliant software. And so that was really big issue, I'm sure, across the country, considering lower resource institutions who may not have already had laptops for staff to take home, or up-to-date laptops that had cameras, right? And so, we found it as an issue. And so we were gratefully able to help several of our institutions purchase the software needed to implement telehealth services. That also included the student health as well, just for those continue to have appointments for, I would say nothing life-threatening, of course, you call 911, but just for students to still have access to those resources. And also students, taking courses online. Yes, it was a shift for, faculty members, but for students who have never been in that type of environment, who already have learning challenges, who learn differently, who need that one-on-one interface. That's still a big challenge. You have to hold yourself accountable to, now I got to sit down and log in and still do my work. It's not like I'm going to class. because I'm getting up because everybody else going to class. I'm at home alone. What is my motivation to get up and log in? And so helping students to, make that transition. And we did a really good job with our UNC Online, our digital learning team provided several courses for our faculty members, those who had never taught online before, for them to learn and come up to speed on some best practices with teaching online. So that was extremely helpful. But you still have, like Dr. Chanay said, you had students who did not have their own laptop, did not have internet at home. You heard of students who were literally driving up to campuses to sit in the parking lot with their laptop to the Wi-Fi of their campus, or going to, McDonald's or Taco Bell because they have free Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
There were some institutions that I know they were fortunate enough to, I know North Carolina Central University was able to provide Chromebooks to their students. They would even ship them to them after they left. And so that was a big piece of it. And I would also say that just keeping the morale of, the staff, faculty and staff, that's a huge piece, because they too were saying, of course, in the fall, I don't want to go back on campus. You think you're around thousands of people every day. You're putting yourself on the line. And when I meet with my affinity groups, I tell them every time we meet, if no one else tells you, I appreciate you, because you are going over and beyond to meet the needs of students by putting yourself on the front line, whether that be in the residential halls. Think about all the residential directors who stayed because you had students who had extenuating circumstances and had nowhere else to go. Are those folks who were providing or carrying the meals to students who are in quarantine or isolation, or taking them, transporting them to, a doctor's office or something, that's a lot to put on a staff member, and very, very stressful. And so I kept encouraging, take some time for yourself, because you can't, if you're not well, how are you going to maintain students? And so I would say still providing those services as healthcare, psychological care, the students who needed housing, because there's a growing number of students who are homeless or suffering from food insecurity. There were students who had jobs. If you are from South Carolina but you're going to school in North Carolina and you worked somewhere, in the city, what do? Do you have to quit your job? If you were just working in Harris Theater, well, you still had a job to go to. But you may have to quit your job, or you end up work study. All those students, if you were an RA, that impacted your money that you thought you were going to receive. And so that was a lot to handle, but I think everybody's doing the best that they can with what we have.
Sure. So taking all that in consideration, what are your thoughts on the way in which teaching and learning and instruction has occurred during the pandemic? And do you think after things return to normal, if we ever get back there, will those trends continue? Will faculty want to continue to practice teaching in a hybrid format or in an online format, or will students see that, hey, I can actually attend a UNC Chapel Hill or an A&T or Lincoln or any other institution and learn remotely? Do you think that trend will continue, or will students and faculty want to return back to the traditional face-to-face instruction for undergraduate instruction for students?
I think great question, Stevie. That was already a trend.
It was.
The number of students attending, classes online. If you're a non-traditional student, if, you have a family, you have to work during the day, then online was perfect for you, or for graduate students, graduate programs, a lot were online now. So that was already a trend. I do think the hybrid model will continue. There will be some students who still need that face-to-face interaction because of how they learn. And I'm one of them. If I had to be back in school, excuse me, online, it's not for me. I already know
It's not for me either.
And so, right. When you think about math courses or sciences, that's a lot to grasp when you're online with 40 or 50 people, and now you don't even want to raise your hand to ask a question, or it's very hard to do that. And if there's a language barrier, that's probably amplified in an online environment. But I think it will continue. We all had to become very creative with that. I think even from a financial model is going to continue, and it's going to allow for more access for students to enroll in college.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to agree with Toya. To be quite honest, it probably was an eye opener for a lot of faculty members. And I think what you're going to find a mixture of faculty members that are going to utilize, I could say here at Lincoln, they're going to utilize the hybrid and looking at face-to-face. I think now they have adjusted. They had all summer to really kind of fine tune their delivery. And we were already doing it, really, to be honest with you, on the graduate level. A number of our graduate courses were online already. So I think just from what has occurred, it's going to continue. It's going to be a mixture. I think the most difficult part about it is when you have an environment similar to Lincoln environment, where you're trying to ensure that the success part, that support part is there for those students who need it, and being able to kind of push them to take advantage of that support. That's going to have to be a combination, definitely, of both. We found out a lot just this semester with students, even though they were face to face, but the stress, not only on faculty, staff, and students, our mental health crisis really went up this semester for our student enrollment. It was, you don't think about it, but just even the fact of having to wear a mask everywhere you go, it became very stressful for our students. And so our counseling office was definitely full throughout the semester. Our director of counseling talked about it in our last director's meeting about the number of cases, how much they've increased just this semester. And then the stress of going to class with the stress of what's going on. And then, the other stress is that we had on our campus, we have isolation. We have a building for isolation and containment and all of those things. And so one of my friends goes to isolation, then I'm nervous because I don't know if I'm going to have to go through contact tracing. And so it was really a stressful time. But I will say that I think faculty here are going to be utilizing a mixture of different platforms. They really have become very creative from the standpoint of even filming a lot of their courses. They've even started doing YouTube, which was like a lot of our faculty didn't know anything about YouTube. YouTube channel, but they just didn't take advantage of it. So I think it's going to make them very creative. I think it's an opportunity for the students to become creative, but I think a combination of both is something that's going to happen here.
Sure. So taking into account that information and understanding both of your backgrounds, what challenges have student affairs staff had with planning student engagement activities for students over the course of the pandemic? And as a second part of that question, how have student affairs practitioners been able to ensure that those activities are effective and the objectives and goals are being met?
I can just say for me personally, it's been tough. I kind of really felt sorry for our student leaders. They were trying to put on programming. The only event that we had, and it was very limited, face-to-face, was coronation. And it was limited really to the family of the king and queen. Everything else that we have done primarily has been virtual. And getting students engaged has been extremely tough. I think at the beginning of the semester, students were like, okay, I get it. I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to do this. But as time goes on, they're worn down. And the largest event that we have had, and this is, you guys can imagine, both Toya and Stevie, was when we did our MIP one-on-one, and that was virtual, but we still had 300 students.
I'm sure.
You know, excuse me. So that was the largest event that we had virtually for the entire semester. But it was tough. I think a lot of our residential programming really increased a great deal. And so we started bringing in, with small groups, we were able to bring in practitioners across the campus, especially from our counseling center. They really were engaged with the health center more than they've probably ever been. And so our residential programming actually increased. But overall programming across the campus, there was a decrease. Of course, we didn't have a homecoming. And for our students in the fall, that's a pivotal thing. But we didn't have football, and we knew what homecoming was going to bring. So that has been the toughest. And even the student leaders have said they have tried to put on individual programming also. Participation has not been there, but we have seen an increase in residential programming, but a decrease in all other programs except for the MIP 101.
Definitely Greek life. I would say that still went on, particularly I can talk about UNC system because I convene all of the fraternity and sorority life directors or coordinators. And, that was a huge conversation. But it was twofold because I'm sure you saw in the news how some organizations, fraternities and or sororities were, a lot of the COVID cases were being traced to fraternity or sorority events in the very beginning. That kind of back to school, you've been away from each other since March. You just want to get out and have some fun. Right. And in my point of view, those are just college students being college students. That was the norm. Right. They didn't know how to adjust in the beginning until it started impacting their health. But as far as recruitment and intake, for the most part, I told them in August, I was like, students, you can tell them there are no classes, but they're going to want to pledge, right? That's all, some of them, that's all they care about. And so, I'm enrolled because I'm coming AKA this semester. That's the reality. We're laughing, but you all know that happens. And so recruitment and intake was able to pretty much move forward on most of our campuses in some really great numbers. I would say it was a little lower for NPHC because the students, just not knowing and perceptions about if I go to membership intake this semester, how people are going to, say I didn't go through the process, and so, you have all that I'm gonna call it nonsense, but anyway, but we haven't had any issues. So it was been very successful. From what I've seen, haven't heard any negative comments from our larger institutions, NC State, UNC Chapel Hill. They had very successful intake and recruitment season this fall. But overall, students they have Zoom fatigue. You know, they're used to being able to assemble.
I think we're on Zoom fatigue. I think we have
are.
Yeah.
You know, they want to go out in the yard. They want to hang, you know, in the Greek bowl or on the bridge. And that has been taken away from them. I felt bad particularly in the spring, for graduating seniors who didn't get to, you know, have that final, you know, month and a half on campus and experience walking across the stage. You know, it's anticlimactic doing it later. But just even for your parents to have that feeling for you. But I think overall, I think institutions probably began to scale back on trying to provide programming because students just stop attending. One institution said they had, you know, pushed a culture of social distancing so much that they then had to pry students out of their room just to get some fresh air. Like, you can't stay in here all the time, like at least walk outside. And so that back and forth is they're worn out. Mm-hmm. And I think also from a conduct perspective, trying to get students just to wear your mask, social distance, you know, that was a challenge because you're always going to have some students who are going to be defiant. And you deal with them, but for the most part, our students did well and they adjusted. I think moving into the spring, you know, we'll see what happens, even though the numbers are up now. Moving into the holidays, most of our institutions are, you know, planning to move forward with instruction. And so, you know, we'll see what happens, but that student engagement piece is so hard. You know, when you used to go into the student center, even go campus recreation, I can't even go play, you know, basketball with my boys. And we can't even, you know, go play, you know, soccer outside. And so that was a lot for students to grapple with, because that was a stress reliever for them that played into their mental health. And so I think unless someone comes up with a new invention on how to engage students online, that is probably it's not going to be the same for a while.
Yeah. In general, how has the pandemic affected, and of course we have two vastly different perspectives here, from a system perspective and then a campus, but how has it affected enrollment, retention, and graduation? Dr. Chanay, I saw you just close your eyes there for a minute.
Yeah, two different perspectives. The UNC system actually experienced increased enrollment, you know, for the fall. Some of our institutions had record-breaking enrollment. UNC Charlotte had record-breaking enrollment. Elizabeth City State University had increased enrollment. North Carolina A&T had increased enrollment. So I think what the pandemic did was allow people to make a choice about, okay, am I just going to sit here and do nothing, or am I going to use my time wisely and continue to go to school? And so our enrollment was maintained. We'll know about graduation rates, you know, in a few months, but overall, we were able to sustain our enrollment, and you know, that was a great feeling for everybody.
Excellent.
I think when you look at it overall, you know, we were on a plane that was really heading for a record freshman class, but a lot of parents were, and especially from some places where our students were coming from, were a little hesitant about allowing their students to come on campus because of the pandemic. We saw a very slight decrease, like 1% or so in our freshman enrollment. But overall, unfortunately, being an open enrollment campus, we always see we always really our numbers from a retention standpoint, first and second year, are always not good in the first place, and this didn't help with the pandemic. And so we had budgeted for, which was kind of across the board, across the nationwide, we had budgeted for a 25% decrease in enrollment. Of course, we did not get to the 25%, which I was glad about that. We had an overall between about 10 to 12% decrease in enrollment overall. So that kind of helped us from the bottom line. But really and truly, we saw a lot of students. Well, I'm not going to say students. I'm going to say parents. A lot of parents that were just a little hesitant how we were bringing students back. Again, this was best practice in the state of Missouri. And so, you know, when all of the higher ed institutions in the state of Missouri got together this summer, everybody was bringing back everybody just like it was a regular semester. Whereas, you know, there were institutions that were saying, okay, we can't have double occupancy in residential halls. We only can have single occupancy. But when it came to sports, you know, we brought back the football team and they were allowed, you know, we didn't have a season, but then they were allowed at a certain point in time to be able to work out. It didn't make any sense in having them in a single occupancy because they were all around each other all the time. So we worked with our athletic department and putting our student athletes in a pod, basically, where those students were 10 to 12 student athletes were together all the time. They worked out together, the whole 9 yards, and lived together. So if anything would happen to any one person, then we could confine the whole entire pod. So we worked a lot with our trainers on that. But yeah, we saw a slight decrease, and again, we saw a decrease overall for what we had. Now, the interesting part about it is that you know, in this recruitment area that we're in right now and recruiting students for the fall of 21, we're not able to really touch students, and that has been very difficult. Everything that we've done is virtually. So we do our own virtual fairs. We do participate in virtual fairs. But what the positive side of this is that we're finding that a lot of our students that are looking at institutions during this time, they're not just applying to a whole lot of institutions. So it seems like they're limiting the number of institutions they're applying for. We find that a lot of students want to stay close to home. So we're getting more applicants from the state of Missouri than the normal trend, but they want to be close. They don't want to be too far from the house. And when you look at our freshman class, I would say majority of that freshman class that came in was from the state of Missouri, whereas we've normally had a large number of students come from Chicago, the Omaha area. A lot of those students did not come. They did not make that 6-hour ride. So I think that is the one thing, the most positive thing out of it is that we're getting a lot of students that are from the state of Missouri, and they're just taking advantage of being close to home.
Okay, great. So as a final question, as an administrator in higher ed and taking in consideration everything that this pandemic has brought on in our profession or in our higher ed world, is there anything that you would have done differently at the onset of the pandemic? Or is there anything that you wish that you knew then that you know now that would have changed some outcomes?
I think for us, I think we've been talking about online hybrid since I've been here, and probably before I got here, and I've been here. I'm going on my third year. But I think that is the thing that really, from, you take a step back, as quickly as faculty have been able to transition classes online, hybrid platform, they could have done it 2 or 3 years ago. And I think that would have better prepared our students in being able to deal with that transition that they had, and even dealing with this semester. You find that when you put under the pressure, you tend to be able to make things happen. But we all know, if this, it's no secret. I think Toya mentioned it earlier. Online has been here for God knows how long. And if we were doing it on the graduate level here at the institution, we really should have been doing it on an undergraduate level. So I think really preparing our students would have been the thing to really do prior to COVID-19, because we're now able to do it. We could have done it 3 years ago or 4 years ago. I think that is the one thing. I think the second thing is that we didn't really have at the time, we really didn't have a best practice. Really and truly, it's not like you can go and look at best practices plans. Yeah, we had emergency plans, we had procedures in place, but we had not really expected a lot of those things to happen. So it caused us to really take a look at what we were doing when we put our whole COVID plan together. We even went further into the plan, and we put a transition plan. We have to go back online, and we're not unable to do face-to-face. But we didn't have a guideline. And I think, I will say this much: the communications between other student affairs personnel across the entire country probably increased a lot during this time, because everybody was trying to pick everybody's brain. Everybody was trying to say, okay, what you guys doing? What are you guys doing? And it really didn't make a difference if you were at a HBCU or a PWI. You're just trying to pick brains. You're just trying to figure out what's the best need and what's the best interest for our students. And so I think that definitely, even though we didn't have our national conferences through NASPA, ACPA and all those things, NASAP, I think that we really communicated better as a whole, trying just to learn off of each other. I think that was one of the things that, sometimes we go to these national conferences and we really don't communicate. We go to the sessions and we socialize, but we really don't communicate to see what people are doing on their particular campuses. So we really had to learn a lot from each other and pull from each other. And I will say that for me personally, we in the state of Missouri, we really were pulling from the large institutions to the small institutions, because it didn't make a difference. Mizzou was facing the same situation. They just had 32,000 student population, but they were facing the same situation we were facing here at Lincoln. So I think that from that standpoint, we just should have planned better. We should have known that this could happen. But I think now that it has happened, we put things in place. I personally don't think we'll ever go back to just being normal. And so I think we'll always, we'll do things face to face, but I think we'll take advantage of utilizing, especially from a class delivery, we'll take advantage of the technology that's been there and utilize it a whole lot better. I think our students will soon adjust and understand that particular delivery mode better. It doesn't make a difference what they're coming in with. So I think this was a learning process for especially higher ed administrators. And to my surprise, even some of our larger institutions, their students had a hard time adjusting to different type of learning modules when they were used to traditionally going to classes face to face. So it was just something that we just learned together. But I think from this, it just puts our institutions in a better situation. And then the last thing I will say is that the only concern that I always have, especially our HBCUs, is financial. Dealing with the fact that a number of our HBCU students were not on campus. How did that affect them financially? Are they going to be able to sustain, not having those students on campus? Are they going to be able to make it through? Are those students going to come back when they're able to open back, if they're able to open back? Those are the things that you worry about the most of this whole pandemic, to be honest with you, is sustainability, especially at our small HBCUs, especially those that don't have state funding. All of the fundraisers, I tell people all the time, we were able to raise record dollars even through the pandemic. But of course, we didn't rely on events. That's a whole nother conversation.
Right.
We people had supported us financially without us having President Gala, and we were able to raise record number of monies here at the institution. So I just think that everybody's going to have to do business totally different, because this might not be the first one, or this might not be the last time we're put in a situation. So I think the planning, and I always say this, and then I'm gonna shut up, just like strategic plannings and plans and all that, we better not put this in the bookshelf. We better keep this close to the heart.
Absolutely.
And we better learn from this one, because strategic plans, enrollment management plans tend to you do them, they're all pretty and nice, and then you put them on the bookshelf and then you do what you want to do. But I'm hoping that through all of this, we're able to really continue through this. And I think then you're going to see some best practices come out of this, and we'll be able to learn across the country how to survive during a pandemic, and what are the best practices to survive during the pandemic.
Thank you. Dr. Corbett?
I think for me, particularly if I was still on a campus, what I would have done differently, or something I did do, but I think I would place more emphasis on. And I think just being in student affairs going forward, institutions really need to review the services they provide for students outside of the classroom, in terms of again, food insecurity, housing insecurity, counseling, health services. Are we really providing some seamless services for students? A lot of things students didn't use until, the pandemic came up, and they're like, oh, well, what about this? What about that? I'm paying fees for this. And so then they started paying attention to those things. But ramping up those type of services and resources for students that really do impact their overall learning. Because if you're homeless and you're trying to study for your final exam sitting in your car, you really can't focus, right? You're not going to do as well. What are we doing about helping those students who are in those situations? I even had students who were hungry but ashamed to go to the food pantry. How do we reinvent that to be more welcoming, inclusive, and really destigmatize people asking for help? And so before, I always say, give the student what they need before they even have to ask. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I would do differently. And that's what I would urge people to do differently in student affairs. And definitely what Marcus said, communicate with your colleagues. I pulled together, I convened all the deans of students, the counseling center directors, career services directors, and particularly deans of students. We started meeting monthly. We used to meet once a semester, I think, or once a year. And so we started meeting monthly via Zoom. Counseling center directors as well, because everyone again needed to share best practices. What are you doing? What are some ideas that I can implement over here? And just how are you feeling? And they were a support system for each other. But really paying attention, I think, going forward to those services outside the classrooms that students really need to sustain and to be retained, and to really feel supported so that they can matriculate successfully.
Thank you so much. Just definitely want to express our gratitude here at sREB for you all taking time to participate in this webinar today. We will certainly send this back out to all that registered for the initial meeting earlier this week. And we certainly appreciate your responses and your experience that you brought to this particular session, and hopefully it will help those who are leading in our institutions across the South kind of think about what happened back in March, what's currently going on, and even as this thing continues to happen, what are some other approaches that they can do to improve the services that they provide for students in higher education amid this COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you very much. And this concludes our webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.